All right, in the last video, I showed you guys how to solve a system of equations by graphing. The idea was that you graph both equations separately, and then your answer is where those two lines cross. Okay, now the downside is that's not always going to work. For example, let's say they cross off of your graph. Like if your graph only goes like 5 in each direction, what if it crosses at the point 15, 20? You're not going to see where it crosses. So then we have to have some other kind of methods to get what the answer is going to be. So graphing works as long as you can see where they're going to cross. But otherwise, you got to try some new stuff. Okay. So in this video, we're going to look at substitution method. Now, the very basics behind this, simply put, this is a very like simple way to put it. If you have two variables, let's say x equals 2, and then I have another variable, let's say y, and I say that y is also equal to 2, then the idea here is that because they both equal to 2, then I can say that x is equal to y. Okay? Because they're both equal to 2, that means they should be equal to each other. So that's the very basics of the idea of what we're going to be doing here. Okay? Now there's a couple things that we need to have occur. Okay? So, things that we need. Okay? So first thing is we need to have two equations, obviously. Right? We've been working with these system of equations. So we need two equations for this to work, which that's all we're doing right now anyways. Okay. And the second thing is that one of your variables must already be solved for. Okay, so one variable must be solved for. Okay. Or in other words, what we're looking for is we need to have either x equals whatever or y equals whatever. Okay. We need one of our equations to look like that. X equals blank or y equals blank. Okay. And then the general idea of what we're going to be doing is that we're going to solve for one variable. Okay. We're going to know what either x is or y is. And then once we know that one, then we're going to plug it back in and get the other variable. So we're going to solve for one variable and then plug it back in to get the other. Oops. Okay. So we're solving for one variable, either x or y, it doesn't matter which one. And then we're using that, we're plugging it back in to get the other variable. Because remember, the answer to your system of equations, just like with graphing, the answer is a single point, right? So the answer is always a coordinate x, comma, y. So we need to know what both pieces are to have a full complete answer, okay? So that's the strategy we're gonna be using here. It'll make a lot more sense once we go through an example. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Let me go ahead and scroll down a little bit. I'll leave that on the screen. Okay. All right, so for example, solve y is equal to 3x plus 14, and y is equal to negative 4x. Okay, so that's our system of equations. Now this one's not too bad because, and if you noticed, one of our requirements was that we needed one equation to be already solved for. And this one they're both already solved for, which is even nicer. They're both y equals something. Okay, so we don't have to do any kind of manipulation before we get started. Okay, so the idea is that because y is equal to this piece, I'm going to go ahead and circle it. Okay, because y is equal to that and y is equal to negative 4x, what we're going to do is we're going to take this part, because this is equal to y, and we're going to substitute it in to that location. Okay, so we're taking that part I circled in green, and we're going to replace it in the second equation where the other y term was. Because y is equal to that, so they should match up. Okay, just like the example at the top. If x is 2 and y is 2, that means that x has to equal y. Same thing here. Both these things are equal to y, so they should be equal to each other. Okay? So here's what we go. So instead of y, I'm going to write 3x plus 14, and I'm going to bring that negative 4x down. Okay. Now what we just did is super important because if you notice, look at our equation now. Now it's only x's. There's no more y's, right? Because I substituted for the y value, which means now we can actually figure out what x is going to be. Okay, so we're going to solve for x. Okay. So we can move things around just like you would do normally. In this question, it's probably easier to move the 3x. Usually I say move the smaller one, but this case I think it's probably easier to move that 3x. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 3x to this side. Okay, so leftovers. We still have that 14. And on the right side, negative 4 minus 3 is negative 7x. Okay, now I just have to get rid of that negative 7. It's attached, so we'll go ahead and divide it to the other side. Okay, so the negatives cancel and the 7s cancel. And we get our first variable. We know x, 14 divided by negative 7 is negative 2. Okay, so that's half of our answer. Let's go ahead and box it just so we don't forget about it. Okay, so we know what x is. We still need to figure out what y is. Okay, so I'm gonna draw a line over here so we can work on the right side over here. Now that we know what x is, we just have to plug that in to get what y is. Now we have two equations that we can choose from. It doesn't matter which one you plug it into. You get the same answer no matter what. Okay, so whichever equation you think is easiest, just plug it into that one. Okay, of these two, I think the second one's probably easier. It has less parts to it. So let's say you go with that one. Y is equal to negative 4x. However, now we know what x is, right? I'm gonna draw an arrow. I now know what x is. So I'm going to take that negative 2 and I'm going to plug it in for x. So we get this. Y is equal to negative 4. And instead of x, I'm going to plug in negative 2. Okay. Now again, this equation is pretty simple. Negative 4 times negative 2. Well, the negatives cancel each other out. And we get y is equal to 8. Okay, great. Now we know what x is and we know what y is. We know what both pieces are. But you still haven't actually answered the question yet. Right? When you solve a system, the answer is a single coordinate. We have two answers, but we haven't put them together yet. Okay? So the very last thing you gotta do is put your points together. Make sure that it's always gonna be your x value, comma, your y value. It doesn't matter which variable you solve for first. It's always gonna be your x, comma, your y. So the answer to this question would be negative 2, because that's our x value, comma 8. So that's our answer to this whole question. And again, if we solve for y first, it doesn't matter. The answer is always going to be x, comma, y. Okay? And that's how you solve with substitution, right? You just take one piece, you plug it into the other one, solve for a variable, and then plug it back in, solve for the other variable. Okay? All right, let's go and do one more example together just to make sure the point gets across. Because again, this is not an easy topic. This is usually one of the topics that students struggle with the most in Algebra 1. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. Let's say the second example is solve x equals 6y minus 7. And your second equation is 4x plus y equals negative 3. Okay, so now in this question, they didn't give us a choice, right? In the last question, just let me go and scroll back up to it for a second. The last question, they gave us a choice. They gave us both the x's and they gave us both equations with y equals. So we got to choose which one we used. In this one, we don't have that. Okay, they only gave us one to use. So let me go and scroll up a little bit. Okay, so they only gave us one equation that's already solved for. So that's the one we have to start off with. All right, notice we have x equals, but we don't have any y equals. So we're going to use that to start off with. Okay, so we're going to take this piece. It says x equals this, okay, which means we're going to take this whole thing and we're going to plug it in where the x is, okay? Now this one's a little more challenging because notice there's that 4 in front. It's a little bit more work. So here's how that looks. That 4 is still going to be there. And then instead of x, I'm plugging in that entire chunk, 6y minus 7. And then I keep going. The next piece was plus y, and the next piece was minus 3. Okay? So you take that whole piece I circled, the 6y minus 7, and that's replacing the x in the other equation. Okay? Now we're kind of back to where we were in the last question. Our only variable in this equation is y. So now we can solve for y. Okay, so the first thing we're going to have to do is we are going to have to multiply. So we have to take this 4 and multiply it across. Okay, so 4 times 6 is 24y. And 4 times negative 7 is negative 28. Okay, don't forget that the other y is still there, so bring that straight down. Plus y equals negative 3. Okay, so now we can combine like terms. We have two y's in there that are on the same side. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to combine them. So 24 plus 1, 25y. And then bring down everything else. So that minus 28 is still there. And that minus 3 is still there. Now we're finally back to a two-step equation. Okay, so now the next thing we'll do is move that 28. Okay, so we can get rid of that by adding it to the other side. Notice I'm keeping everything lined up because it's very important to stay organized. It's very, very easy to get lost in these questions, especially something like this one. This one I would say is a challenging question. The one previous, I would say maybe it's a little bit easier. Okay, so stay organized, keep everything lined up so you don't get lost. Okay, and that way you're also showing all of your work. So bring down this piece. So we have 25y, and then negative 3 and 28 make 25. And now we're pretty much done with this piece, right? Get rid of that 25, we can divide both sides. So we get that y is equal to 1, okay? All right, all of that work, and we are not done. But I guarantee on the next quiz or test, some students are going to stop there thinking they're done, but they're not, okay? We know what y is, so now we've got to figure out what x is. So again, your choice. You can use the top equation or the bottom equation, okay? It doesn't matter which one. I would say for this one, the top one's probably easier because it's already set up with x equals something. So I would go with that one. X equals 6y minus 7. But again, now we know what y is, right? So because y is 1, we're going to plug that in right there. So it looks like this. X equals 6, and then y, we now know is 1 minus 7. Okay, we do some mental math. 6 times 1 is 6, and then 6 minus 7 is negative 1. So now we know what x is. Okay, last thing is put them together, and then we're done. Again, be very, very, very careful. It's easy to make this next mistake. Even though we solved for y first, it does not matter. It's always going to be x comma y. Okay, so our answer for this one is actually the negative 1 first, and then the positive 1. Okay, if you flip those around, then you lose points because it would be incorrect. Okay, so that is your final answer.